Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. I hope you had a great weekend, and we are this week going to be covering lots of different topics. This first hour, going to spend some time coming back to a topic we addressed on Friday, the smash and grab looting that is taking place, which has really started to get out of hand. And so I've put two articles related to that, and it fits into a larger theme that I thought I would also mention, and that is, it's pretty obvious now. We have still a few days left before the end of this year, but I think you can already see with all of the statistics that this will have been the deadliest year for law enforcement ever. And that is just not my opinion, but it comes from the Fraternal Order of Police, and I'm going to give you some of those facts and figures as well. And interestingly enough, I almost always pick a lot of the topics over the weekend. I had no idea that today on Monday, this would be kind of a lead story, at least in a fair amount of conservative media. I don't know where all the other news outlets have covered that. And when you start seeing that, you wonder, well, is there some memo that goes out? Because it's very true in the area of the establishment media. You've probably seen it before, and you go and you'll see one newscaster use the same kind of phraseology as the next newscaster, the next newscaster, the next newscaster. They're like reading off of a script. I don't know that that exists in the conservative world or the Christian world. If it does, I'm never getting the memo. But in some respects, some of the topics I thought about that we should cover on Monday, because of some of the articles that I found, are certainly some things that other news outlets are talking about. But I do want to, again, look at that from a biblical point of view, this booklet that we have made available in the past on criminal justice, and even the conversation we had with Dr. Miro Matthews about this idea that sadly crime does pay. And if you have the booklet, pages 6 and 7 really get into the details coming from some of the research done by Morgan Reynolds about even when he did the studies years ago, about the fact that unfortunately certain kinds of crimes do pay because your probability of being caught, prosecuted, incarcerated are very low, even more so. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Before this hour is out, there are some other interesting things coming about the virus, Omicron virus. One from a piece that we have posted by Roger Kimball, who's really kind of looking at it more from a philosophical point of view and some common sense. But we also have a very prestigious doctor, French doctor, who actually has figured out what the T value is for Omicron. I'll explain what that is and why that's important. And then we also have a very good piece that comes from our good friend Dr. Michael Brown about the real need for us to pray about the decision coming down on the case having to do with abortion. We'll get into more of the details there and maybe even take you through, as I even did for my own Sunday school class yesterday, looking at the different options and looking at the different particular justices, how they might rule, and also just an update on what has happened in at least one part of the country, that would be Texas, which actually does ban abortions after heartbeat because of this law that has been put together, and the impact of that has been pretty dramatic. So lots to cover. If that's not enough, in the second hour, we're going to have in studio with us Chris Dowling. He is a writer as well as a director and producer. We're going to talk about one of the films coming out, but I also just wanted to spend some more time with him talking about some of his other faith-based films and use that maybe as an encouragement to some of you budding directors, producers, even individuals want to get in the film industry, as we try to every once in a while encourage some of you to use your gifts in the area of writing. We certainly need some of you to use your gifts in the area of video production. And so I thought it might be an encouragement to you. And if we don't get to some of the other issues I was going to talk about, well, there's always tomorrow. Fortunately, our producer, Steve, has made it possible for each day for me to have about an hour in which we can cover some of the issues in the news. And that's exactly what we plan to do. First article here. Looting in San Francisco. This is amazing because Michael Schellenberger says it this way. Usually at this time of the year, San Francisco's luxury stores are decked with holiday garlands. Instead, they're boarded up after widespread flash mob looting turned Union Square, the city's most fashionable shopping district, into an area resembling a blighted neighborhood in Detroit. Having grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I can tell you that story. Oftentimes, my parents would say, let's go into the city, which means we'd go into San Francisco. We would go to Union Square. Back then, we'd always go to City of Paris, which was this beautiful building built actually in the 19th century. And then all sorts of other shops. Today, I'm not sure it's there. I'm pretty sure it's not. But you've got Saks Fifth Avenue. You've got Neiman Marcus. You've got Macy's. You go down the street. You've got also Nordstrom's, and on and on and on. And this is a place where people go to shop. You can see the article that Karen has posted there to see that it just looks like some kind of war zone, and that is the case. So one of the individuals that was interviewed in this piece said it's a ghost town. Every store has a security guard. People are going to lose their jobs, and these things have a ripple effect. Of course, 2 weeks ago, as the article points out, San Francisco was the first of several progressive cities hit by smash and grab mobs of thieves, sometimes as many as 80 in a group. And video from San Francisco shows them looting Louis Vuitton shows and, for example, other situations. Of course, you have Los Angeles, Chicago, Minneapolis. Matter of fact, the one that first got my attention actually come from the Los Angeles Times. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But Michael Schellenberger goes on to say, okay, why is that? Well, he says there's several reasons. Part of the problem is lack of police. San Francisco and other cities are short of cops, making robberies easier to get away with. San Francisco is short 400 officers. Los Angeles is short 300 officers. And Minneapolis is down 200 officers. And you can see that if you don't have a cop on the beat, that can have an impact. The other arguments he makes, progressive prosecutors have been letting criminals go free, sending the message that theft of property is not going to be prosecuted in the same way as others. Many other suspects are being allowed to go free before their court date, even though more than half of those offenders, and in some cases 3/4 of violent offenders released from the San Francisco jails, actually then go on to commit other crimes. By keeping them in jail, they can't actually perpetrate a crime. And then, of course, one other one he points out is just the whole emphasis of Marxism and socialism. The real crime, at least according to Karl Marx back in the 19th century, was that some people own property. That would be the proletariat. And capitalism is the very dangerous reason for that. And property is theft is really become one of the most important slogans of the socialist revolution. So that's just San Francisco. We come back, though, I do want to talk briefly about Los Angeles. That was the second article that we've posted on the website here. Kevin Rector spends a little bit of time talking about this, but again, this was a very important article that appeared in the Los Angeles Times, in which I think a lot of people, even on the left, even on the progressive side, are saying, maybe this was a mistake to keep talking about defunding the police, and I'm going to get into that. Then we'll move on to some others, because we do now know what we suspected, and that is this Omicron variant is not going to be very dangerous. Its T-value, and I'll explain what that is in just a few minutes, actually is much lower and suggests that it probably is much safer. But we'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Imagine your frustration if a sportscaster never gave you the right score of your favorite team. That is the frustration Republican members of Congress have with the scores given by the Congressional Budget Office. But it really isn't their fault, since they must score legislation based on the gimmicks written into the bills. Senator John Cornyn wants an honest cost estimate of the tax and spending bill now before the U.S. Senate. He argues the American people deserve more than smoke and mirror accounting from Washington, D.C. That is the request he made in a letter to the heads of the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation. Both agencies released scores for the bill that the House passed and sent to the Senate. Even using their accounting, you have a bill that spends $1.6 trillion while only raising $1.3 trillion in taxes. One organization not required to accept these budget gimmicks estimate the bill could require $4.6 trillion in spending. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget set the figure at $4.9 trillion. Why the difference between the CBO estimates and the others? Well, the bill sets arbitrary sunsets and expirations to make the legislation look less expensive, but have no bearing on reality. Once these child allowances and tax credits are given, it is unlikely any would ever be revoked. Former President Ronald Reagan observed, "The closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program." If this inaccurate cost estimate isn't bad enough, you still have members of the Biden administration arguing that spending trillions of dollars on new government programs won't cost anything. Talk about an economic statement completely divorced from reality. Here's hoping that someone in one of these agencies is finally willing to get the score right. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
But once again, let's come back to this whole issue of looting and how brazen some of that has been. As a matter of fact, that's the title of this one: Brutal, Brazen Crimes Shake L.A., Leaving City at a Crossroads. Just even the opening paragraph gets your attention. Crews of burglars smashing their way across Los Angeles' most exclusive stores, robbers following their victims, including a star of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and a black entertainment host, to their residences. And after this week, the fatal shooting of an individual, 81-year-old admired philanthropist and wife of a music lesson in Beverly Hills. Now, again, some of you might just say, I am so glad that I don't live in San Francisco. I'm so glad I don't live in downtown Chicago. I am so glad I don't live in Los Angeles, or all of the other stories. And the point I'm making is, first of all, we do have some listeners in a few of those places, some that hear it on a radio station that can be heard there, or others that, of course, can hear it online. But the point I'm making is this: you need to pay attention to actually who you're going to elect next year. I've said before that a lot of people probably couldn't have told you who their county judge was until all of a sudden we had the pandemic and the lockdown, and we started saying, wait a minute, these people are locking down our area of the world and affecting businesses. I've also said a lot of people probably couldn't tell you who was on their city council or even in their school board. But all of a sudden, after all the things that have been happening in that regard, a lot of people are paying attention to who's on the school board and saying, maybe we need to run a better candidate for the school board. I would suggest you someone else that you need to look at. Who's running for district attorney? What do they think about all of this? Because as this article points out, after 2 years of rising violent crime in Los Angeles, these incidents have sparked a national conversation and led to local concern about both the crimes themselves and where the outrage over the violence existed. Now, if you look at the overall crime rate, it's not as high as it was during the gang wars of the 1990s. So that's true. So I want to put that in some perspective. That being true, though, if you look at the issue of violent crime, it has increased. And much of this violence actually is taking place in situations, poor communities, vulnerable populations. Of course, it's affected the homeless. If we're concerned about those least able to protect themselves, they end up being the victims. And yet in California, and I have quite a number of listeners in California, you know that this has been something that was actually surfaced in even the last elections. Polls in the 2020 election showed that California voters supported many of these measures to actually have criminal justice reform, which really meant rolling back some of the sentencing laws and trying to reduce prison populations, which is one of the reasons why this whole idea of criminal justice is something we talk about here on Point of View from time to time, especially when we look at the issue of how to think about these issues biblically in terms of punishment, restitution, retribution, and the rest. And so just something to be thinking about. And again, we can see that there are just so many facts and figures coming in that suggest that the world is getting more dangerous. No, it's nothing like the 1990s, the gang wars, but it isn't as safe as it was just 2 years ago, which of course leads me to my last point before we move on to another topic, and that is the head of the Fraternal Order of Police, that's Patrick Yos, said, "We are on pace this year to see the highest number of officers shot in the line of duty in 1 year ever recorded." He gives the numbers of the number that have been shot in line of duty, then the number that died, so those who were shot fatally. Then something else that's new is what they call ambush-style attacks on the cops. And all of these things are just jumping up in ways that I think you can possibly, as we mentioned just a minute ago, explain in light of some of the rhetoric. But again, let me quote from Patrick. He says, "There is no doubt that the recent erosion of respect for law enforcement has fueled more aggression towards police officers than it has been seen in previous years." He says, "As violence continues to be aimed at law enforcement, our officers continue to show up every day to keep the community they serve safe. These men and women run towards danger to protect the public when everyone else is running away." So true. And so again, you can say, well, maybe this whole idea of defund the police was not a good idea. And of course, you might remember a while back where the press secretary for Joe Biden, Jen Psaki, tried to argue that really this is not a problem with the Democrats, it's a problem with the Republicans, because they wouldn't actually sign on to what was called the American Rescue Plan, partially because it was just full of pork, and it really wouldn't have done anything to advance police. And so that one, which she made with a great seriousness, actually earned her from the Washington Post. Fact checker Glenn Kessler, who we've talked about on this program, gave Psaki's claim 3 Pinocchios. And I like one commentator said, well, frankly, robbing her of the much-deserved 4th Pinocchio. And lest you think that she was trying to completely blur the lines, and there were actually Republicans that were trying to defund the police, you had at that time, and this is a quote from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said, let me come on the record, defunding the police means defunding the police. It does not mean budget tricks or funny math. By the way, we're talking about funny math. My piece today has to do with whether or not the Congressional Budget Office has given us accurate numbers. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But let me move on to our third article, and this one comes from an individual that has been, of course, writing about some of these issues for some time, and that's Roger Kimball, in which he points out that he doesn't claim to be a doctor or even having medical advice, but he says that so far what we have seen from the Omicron variant that came out of South Africa is pretty much it's been a dud unless you're looking at the stock market. And he says, we can always play the TSTS game. I didn't realize what that was. That's too soon to say. Okay. But he says, I think this is not going to be any real issue. So he says, why all the panic? Well, one theory he has is that because panic is an antidote to boredom, people are very bored. And also, if you are convinced that we need to have control over the economy, the latest variant is something that gives you a little bit more control over people's lives and the rest. But then he, on the third page, says something I've been saying now for a couple months. That is, COVID is a coronavirus, not dissimilar to the virus that causes the common cold. It is everywhere. It is constantly mutating. The world will never be rid of it. So, of course, his argument is that it will never be rid of it, but at the same time, it will never end. Because on the one hand, from a biological point of view, we'll always have something like it. I would make a distinction and say the coronavirus is a little different than the typical common cold virus, but okay, I understand that. And so then he says, well, why will it never end? He said, well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, hospital administrators love the disease because it's kept a steady stream of government premiums flowing into their coffers and gives you the numbers and the dollars. And that's, you want to see sticker shock. I had no idea the kind of money that's flowing into some of these hospitals from federal funding. Again, it's not like the federal government has the money, it just prints dollars. But also vaccines are big business. And he goes into this in some detail. He said, look, I'm not anti-vaccination. As a matter of fact, I've gotten jabbed twice, and I'm thinking about getting the St. Anthony Fauci booster. Never heard it called about that. But then he reminds us that there's a new book out by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And again, he tends to be what's called an anti-vaxxer. But his new book reminds us that 45% of the Food and Drug Administration budget comes from pharmaceutical companies, that Anthony Fauci's agency owns half of the Moderna patents. And you can go through, and matter of fact, I have a list of all the members of Congress that have stock in either Pfizer or Moderna. And doesn't mean that they aren't doing things in your best interest, but it also raises some questions, possibly, about whether or not they have as much objectivity as you would like to think that they have. Before we move on, and again, you can read this article in its entirety after we come back from the break, I do want to quote from a French scientist that has looked at this in some detail. I'm only going to spend a couple minutes on it at most, because what we now know is what is called the T value of the Omicron virus variant. Comparing that to the Delta variant, we can see that it's like a third in terms of the T value, and I'll explain what that is. Then we're going to move on to some other topics, and one of those has to do with the issue of will the Supreme Court actually act on this issue of abortion? We talked about some of that on Friday, but I think a very good piece by Michael Brown reminds us that, if nothing else, we should be people of prayer like never before. And he gives us some very good reasons for that, and I will give those to you right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the Omicron variant, and if you'd like to join us, I'd love to hear your comments, 1-800-351-1212. Next hour, we're going to be talking with, in studio, Chris Dowling, who is a filmmaker. I think you'll enjoy not only the conversation, but maybe want to know a little bit about some of the films he's already produced and one coming out. And I think that would be something I was looking forward to. And during the Christmas season, sometimes people say, I'm ready to get out and go to a movie, but there are a lot of movies I don't want to go to. Is there something that might affirm my belief, my faith, my family? And we always, from time to time, try to tell you about some of those. Let's go back to Omicron for just a minute. And this is, again, research which was done by Dr. Jacques Fontini. Now, he's a professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of Aix-Marseille. Now, again, if I had Penna Dexter here, her French is better than mine. I think that's how you say it. But nevertheless, he is an individual that has calculated what is called the T value. That really is the index of transmissibility. It's somewhat easy to calculate if you were to just do contact tracing and see who has that virus, who caught it from someone else. You can put together kind of a tree, and the values are pretty much known now for the various strains. And matter of fact, I will actually quote from this chart. I'll hold it up for anybody that happens to be watching on air, but I'll give you the numbers. The original T value for the Wuhan virus, or the virus which we call SARS-CoV-2, the original one that came out of China, most likely, although that's even up to debate. Can you believe that's up for debate? That was 2.16, so it was about 2. Now, after a period of time, you get some variants. You had one out of the UK, which was Alpha. That was 3.59. You had one out of Brazil that was called Gamma. That was 3.65, so that's a little higher. And then you had a Beta variant that came out of South Africa. That's 3.82. But all of them are in the 3.5, 3.8 range. Then you have the Delta variant, which is 10.67. So you can begin to see why Delta variant was the one that everybody was paying attention to. Essentially, in round numbers, almost 3 times as high. That doesn't necessarily mean it was 3 times as transmissible. It might, but, you know, it's not a perfect linear, but close enough to give you that idea. So with all of those numbers, where does, drum roll please, Omicron variant list? 3.9. In other words, it is about 37% of the Delta value. So it's a relatively low value, similar to Beta, Gamma, and Alpha, some of the other variants that turned out to not be real of concern. And the higher the T value, this article goes on to say, the less effective current vaccines are in defending against the variant and protecting people from it, which is why there was concern about the Delta variant. At 10 versus 3, or even if you round up to 4, you can see we're dealing with something very differently. Now, again, I won't try to geek out here. Since I have a science background, I have to be careful I don't get too scientific here, but Dr. Fontini actually explains why this is the case, and that is the mutations aren't directional. Let me just quote from him. This is translated from the French, of course. For Omicron, the mutations go in all directions without any particular logic, some annihilating each other. In other words, one mutation actually might mess up or completely render neutral or null another particular one in terms of, because some of them might get antibiotic resistance because of a mutation, but actually what happens is this series of mutations, in some cases, it's sort of killing itself. Anyway, let me go back to his quote. Some of these neutralizing antibodies will have a very low activity on this variant. This analysis of the Omicron variant suggests that the variant will not supplant Delta. Which is an understatement, of course, but yes, if indeed you're at 3.9 and Delta is 10 plus, you can see, nope, not going to be a problem. So just wanted to try to get everybody to calm down a little bit. You always eat, and even this weekend, let's give Dr. Anthony Fauci his credit. and I have a lot of people that are in the listening audience, don't want to give him any credit, but even on the Talking Head shows this weekend, he says, this doesn't look like a big concern, but then you always get that, but you never know. It's too early to say, and we get that, and so everybody gets all wound up sometimes because there is no reason necessarily to think that this variant is much different than some of the others we've already talked about. But just wanted to give you those facts. Maybe that will be covered today by the establishment press. I've covered it, and I hope that it helps you. Something that probably won't be covered is a great example of why we need a level of discernment. And one aspect of discernment is when you read an article, first of all, read it to its end. Second of all, read other articles. And you will today, mark it on your calendar here, I'm going to say some very positive things about comedian Sarah Silverman. You've got to say, what? Well, that is the case. Okay, CNN comes out with a story, which, as some people are calling it, DeSantis derangement syndrome, because whenever Governor DeSantis in Florida says something, oh boy, here we go. And so Ron DeSantis talked about the idea of the civilian military force. And the headline for CNN, DeSantis proposes a new civilian military force in Florida that he would control. Oh boy, that he will control. Now, again, then it talks about the fact that he would reestablish a World War II era civilian military force that he, not the Pentagon, would control. Now, these are the words of CNN. You can see why it got people all riled up. And as a result, then you started having people just kind of lose their perspective very, very quickly. And one of those individuals is Joe Reed, because Joe Reed sometimes will actually talk about some of these issues. And when she's actually, Joy, talking about that, let's just take where the tweet was. So this is fascist bananas, right? And then you had some other people starting to get even more extreme about some of the statements. For example, one individual said DeSantis was trending on Twitter alongside of Gestapo. And this is a result of false narratives, one person pointed out in Fox News. But you had some others that were actually suggesting that this would be extremely dangerous because this would then mean that he's not encumbered by federal government. And as a result, this would be something that would mean that he would, because he's not encumbered by federal government, would actually have control of the military. And Charles Cook kind of lost his patience at that point, saying, unlike, you mean like the massive nuclear-filled civilian military force under Joe Biden's control? That's completely different. Well, nevertheless, this hysteria just broke out, and I'm not even doing it justice by all of the comments being made here. Here's another one I did find. Wow, the Republican governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, wants to form a personal militia like the political leaders in Iraq have. It would be a militia that only answers to him. This is the beginning of a red army. This, by the way, was a commentator on Sirius XM radio, a liberal, by the way. And anyway, everybody's just going nuts. I mean, it's the Twitterverse is crazy at this point. And in the midst of this, okay, let's give credit where credit is due. After especially Joy Reid's statement, Sarah Silverman actually, who's really kind of an outspoken liberal critic, said, please read the article before you post this stuff. You're a news outlet. The truth has to matter. Well, 2 cheers for Sarah Silverman. And the reason for it is all you had to do is read to, I think it was the 4th paragraph, which says that states have the power to create defense forces separate from the National Guard, though not all of them use it. If Florida moves ahead with the plan to reestablish the civilian force, it would become the 23rd active state guard in the country, joining California, Texas, and New York. What? So what really the Florida governor is recommending is not any different than what already exists and is at the whim of the governor of California, the governor of New York, and actually available to more than almost 24 states. And so that would be the 23rd of the states that would have those. And so this complete hysteria was actually tamped down initially by, of all people, Sarah Silverman. So I appreciate the fact that she has at least enough discernment to read to the fourth paragraph and not let the liberals lose their control. I'm tempted to say some other things, but we'll leave it at that. Let's take a break, though. I want to come back before we run out of time and talk about this call to prayer from Michael Brown and what we think might happen with this Supreme Court decision coming down on the issue of abortion. And again, then the next hour, we're going to spend some time talking about some of the films that have been done by Chris Dowling and learn a little bit about his filmmaking journey. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and let me, if nothing else, encourage you to be praying about this abortion case before the Supreme Court. As we've pointed out, and again, let me just give you a few facts here that are relevant, and that is in 1973, we, of course, had the case called Roe v. Wade. Also at the time, Doe versus Bolden. I didn't mention this, and it's worth mentioning that you have Jane Roe, who actually, we know her name, Norma McCorvey, who was the plaintiff in that particular case, but who, interestingly enough, though she was pro-abortion at the time, became pro-choice, became a Christian. Flip Benham baptized her and became a Christian. She was on the show with us once years ago. And nevertheless, here's a pro abortion person that becomes pro-life. The Doe is Mary Doe. She became pro-life as well. So it's an interesting story out of 1973. Let me go on. Then you have 1992, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, when many people thought abortion might be outlawed again, at least at the federal level. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute because it relates to the article that we've posted by Michael Brown. And of course, now we have 2021, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which was known as the Gestational Age Act, passed in Mississippi in 2018, bans abortion after the first 15 weeks of pregnancy. But of course, the current decisions, a lot of that goes back to Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992, would allow a woman to obtain an abortion in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy, which, by the way, was tied to viability, which is ridiculous because, matter of fact, I'm going to be doing a commentary in the future. We have now one child that was born much, much earlier. Because of the advent and the advances in neonatology, viability has changed dramatically over time. But again, how would the vote take place? My argument is that the Supreme Court could rule that the Mississippi law is unconstitutional. You have three justices that would certainly rule that, Justices Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor. Whether you could find two others, don't know, but that's a possibility. Another possibility, which we talked about with Lathan Watts, is that the Supreme Court could rule that the Mississippi law is constitutional, but decide not to overturn Roe versus Wade. That could be a compromise brought about by Justice John Roberts, convincing at least Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh and some others to come up with some kind of middle ground. It's pretty obvious that Justice Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito would want to overturn Roe versus Wade. I think Amy Coney Barrett would be there as well. But that's one possibility. And then the other is that they could declare the Mississippi law constitutional and then overturn the previous rulings in Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which brings me to the Michael Brown piece. Because he said after these hearings, you had some people say, quote, if you believe that women should have the right to choose abortion, today's Supreme Court argument was a wall-to-wall disaster. But as he says, put another way, if you believe in the sanctity of life beginning in the womb, today's Supreme Court argument was a wall-to-wall victory and a great cause for celebration. Because he points out that they could let the Mississippi law exist and certainly not do anything with overturning Roe versus Wade, or they could do that. And as often and as logical as you think that is, he then, in the bottom part of his first page, gives us the story back in 1992. Because you might remember, as we alluded to the other day, that the Senate rejected Judge Robert Bork. And so as a result, then Justice Anthony Kennedy was put in. Because he was, many people thought that he was conservative enough that he would overturn Roe versus Wade. And there are people that look at the evidence behind the curtain of secrecy to suggest that indeed Kennedy was lined up in a 5-4 majority supporting Pennsylvania's statute regulating abortion. And Chief Justice William Rehnquist assigned himself the opportunity to write that opinion. But then back before that, what happened is that Kennedy then was persuaded to change his mind and ended up being the swing vote that kept Roe versus Wade in existence. The reason that Michael Brown brings this up is he said we should, rather than feeling self-assured that Roe versus Wade might be overturned, we need to give ourselves to prayer like never before. He says, saying, Father, turn the hearts of these justices to your heart. Give them the courage and integrity to do what is right in your sight. Give them a heart for the least of these. And he goes into some detail, giving us an example of Elisha and some others in which I think we really do need to be praying about this case of Roe versus Wade. Because, again, some people don't understand that even if Roe versus Wade is overturned, and that is something that I think so many of us around the table would hope would happen, what it would simply do is then return the country back to what was in existence before 1973. That is, the states now would then be the regulators of abortion, because after all, any particular problem or power or in kind of legislative influence that is not ultimately as delegated enumerable rights, and these enumerated rights go to the federal government, then they reserve to the states and the people. So you would have some states like New York, California that probably have liberal abortion laws. You have other states like Texas or Mississippi that would have them. And that kind of leads us to what we talked about a little bit on Friday. And that is, right now in Texas, we've had a chance to see what that looks like, because the Texas heartbeat law, which was passed back in May, and then actually passed before that, but signed by the governor in May, and then went into effect September 1st, because it does not have the state enforcing this. It has been difficult for there to be an entity to sue, and because the state really doesn't have standing. And so in some respects, this heartbeat law has actually allowed us to save the lives of a number of children, of unborn babies. And you might have heard us talk about what you can find in the TexasHeartbeatLaw.com, in which on Friday we were talking about 14,366 lives saved. I looked at it this morning. It's now up to 14,460. Not sure exactly how they calculate that. I want to learn a little bit more about that, because I'd like to do a commentary on it. Could be that just estimating the number of people, of abortion-minded women who can't get abortion, or it could be they're taking some of those numbers from all the pregnancy resource centers, which are really having very increased client loads. And so people say, well, what would this be like? Well, Texas has given us a little bit of an idea of what it looks like, and all the more reason for us to pray about this issue of abortion. And that is our fourth article, and I wanted you to read that on our website at pointofview.net. Real quickly, just before we say goodbye for the first hour, let me mention that we also have my commentary, Getting the Right Score, and it is the idea of having this very important piece of legislation before the United States Senate, which we still encourage you to hit that button that says Take Action and tell your two senators how you stand on that issue. But again, the Congressional Budget Office has given a score to it, which is completely erroneous, because they have to, based on the law, follow the budget gimmicks written into the law, which are not even reasonable and not even accurate. And so this is why you've had some individuals, including Senator John Cornyn and others, call for the Senate to actually be able to get an accurate score from the Congressional Budget Office, saying that people, and in particular the American people, deserve more than smoke and mirrors accounting from the Washington, D.C. office. So we'll see where it is. But it's a reminder of why we've encouraged you to contact your two senators about the Build Back Better Act, so you can read my commentary on Getting the Right Score, and you can see the Take Action item on contacting your two senators about this piece of legislation before them. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about filmmaking, a new film, and just some things that I think would be an encouragement to some of you out there that maybe are budding producers or directors or filmmakers. So we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. We're going to talk about kind of a filmmaking journey. I think you're really going to enjoy some of the conversation that we're going to have, because we are privileged to have in studio with us today Chris Dowling. He is a writer, director, and producer. And do you think of all the different projects he's been involved with? Tim Tebow, one on a tour with Asperger's. We've talked about also things on television, Rock Slide. The one that we are actually featuring at the moment is The Man from Nowhere. If you go to the website, you will see under his picture a link. There's a trailer there, and you know what I always encourage you to do. Why don't you watch the trailer first? It won't last too long. Gives you an opportunity to know a little bit more about this particular film. And then I encourage you to click on that share button, put it on your Facebook page or Twitter page. And so we'll talk about that film, but we'll talk just a whole about this idea of making films, and what a great encouragement I hope this might be to some of you in the future. Just as when we have a Christian Writers Conference every year, and I encourage those of you that have gifts in writing to use that effectively. I suspect there's probably some of you out there that might someday like to be a writer, producer, director, maybe all of the above, and you'd say, well, I want to learn from this individual. So, Chris, it is great to have you in studio with us.
Thanks for having me on, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, first of all, take the time to focus on The Man from Nowhere. Interesting story. An individual gets a cancer diagnosis. Now you're starting to get back into all the issues that we've talked about before, prodigal sons, faith, and all the rest. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a look at what is in that film?
Yeah, and it's funny you said prodigal son, because we really feel like this is a prodigal father story, which, is kind of a twist on that, where, the father, he's a New York Times bestselling author, but he's chased the fame and the fortune and everything that went with being, who he was as an author and not who he was as a father.
Yes.
And so he's had this fractured relationship with his 35-year-old son, who now it's, cue the cats in the cradle music, but he doesn't have time for his father. And he finds out his father has this cancer diagnosis and realizes this is his last chance to kind of make or break with his son, and his son wants nothing to do with him. And so he shows up at his son's, door and tries to reengage the relationship. I think what makes this one unique too, though, is being an author, he has a film noir book that he's written.
Yes.
And we watched that story play out as well. And that story is actually, we find out the book is a love letter to his son about a detective who'll do anything to find his son who's been lost with like kind of this underbelly crowd. It's been powerful. There's, to have faith films or aspirational films, inspirational films that deal with an adult father and son, it's just not a very frequent thing we see out there. So it was cool to kind of do a new take on something.
Well, and you didn't mention in passing, but let's pick up on it for just a minute. Cats in the Cradle, a very famous music piece. But again, this is a really fleshing that out. And how many times over the years that we have talked about here on Point of View, Fatherless America, in which we've talked about a lot of people growing up without a father, or the father was there physically but not emotionally. And that's what you're dealing with here. An individual is so busy, never had time to raise his kids, and now his kid doesn't care about his father. And how many times have we seen that in the world today?
Yeah, no, it's so prevalent. And what was really cool is we've had screenings where we've had these grown men weeping and coming up afterwards and saying that's me, or that's my dad, or that's us, and so that's, again, it's just, that's the magic of film, right? It's powerful, and all that stuff that you've never been able to say to your father, now you see these two characters having this, relationship. And I just hope it would give inspiration for someone to approach somebody before it's too late, for that fractured relationship. And it's, it's larger than that. It doesn't just have to be father son, although that's our story, but like every one of us has someone in our life where, because we're hard-headed and we're, pride gets in the way, but whatever. Sometimes we can't even remember what started that fracturing.
Right.
Because it was so long ago, right? But we're so hard-headed that we won't go back and say, hey, man, I'm really sorry if this went this way, or let's fix this. And that's just the human spirit. It's very interesting. But so I think it's much more universal in that sense. It's a story we all share.
And again, I'd love to get a DVD and just show it sometimes when I speak at men's retreats, because that would set the tone for all the conversation that you have. Because a lot of guys walk in and they're kind of saying, well, I think we're okay, or maybe they've just read a book recently about being a better father or being a better man, but they haven't really thought it through. And you've read on the screen a really powerful story that helped people understand that this is a breached relationship and that forgiveness may not be enough. There's going to be also some kind of spiritual intervention that needs to take place to get somebody to actually step in and deal with that particular issue. So very good. By the way, I might just mention, I was just reading here, you were able to film the movie in 8 days? How in the world did you do that? Go get behind the screen and tell us how you did that.
I mean, honestly, that is a testament. So I wrote and produced this one, and my co-writer is a director, Matt Green, and he's the film professor at Masters University. And
good. Yeah.
In a strange way, the way we approached this, because we knew we only had 8 days, which again, it just sounded ludicrous, but we said we have to. It's almost like Master Chef or Iron Chef or whichever the one it is, where they just give you all the ingredients and they say, now go make this meal.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So we said we had 8 days, we have no budget, and so how are we going to do this? Well, so. We said, okay, well, let's shoot everything that we can on like the Masters University property. So we have one base and we're just moving around. And then we're like, basically, it's got to be such a great character-driven piece because we don't have car chases or special effects or anything. We got to have a very human story with, contained limited characters. And even then, I'll be honest, I still didn't think we were going to pull it off. And man, by the grace of God, because that's the only way that could happen. We did it 8 days, and I think we only went overtime 1 day. I mean, it was crazy. And also, when you think that we have a whole film noir B storyline that takes, wardrobe, makeup, our locations that look legit. I mean, so it wasn't really a small task, but yeah, Matt. He gave me confidence that we could do it because he was so confident. I thought he was foolish, but he nailed it. So it is a modern miracle, if you will.
Let me just mention that if you would like some more information, of course, it's tied into PureFlix, and you have an opportunity here to find out more. And we have all sorts of information about it on the website, The Man from Nowhere. And again, upon learning of a cancer diagnosis, this New York Times bestselling author pens his final novel in a last-ditch attempt to reconnect with his estranged son before it is too late. We've talked about the prodigal son. This is sort of like the prodigal father, and certainly something that you would benefit from as well. I have that on the website. By the way, we also have some calls coming in. So, by the way, if you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, we'll take some of those as we go along. But let me, first of all, encourage you to take the time to read a little bit more about that. It's on the website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can go to PureFlix and find it, but we've made the link very easy for you. And most importantly, we have the trailer. Because once you have that, then you have obviously an opportunity to watch it and get a little bit of an understanding of how it comes together, look at some of the production values, and I think you will be very encouraged to do that. We come back, first of all, I'll take a phone call, but also we'll spend some time just maybe talking a little bit more about the value of some of these faith-affirming films. They don't always have to end perfectly. They don't always have to be tied up with a bow, but at the same time, I think some of us, especially as we come into the Christmas season, say, I really would like to see something that would be encouraging to my family, encouraging to faith. And so that's why we took the time to see if Chris Dowling would come in studio. So he's given us an hour, and we're going to spend some time with him. And we'll take some phone calls too. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Imagine your frustration if a sportscaster never gave you the right score of your favorite team. That is the frustration Republican members of Congress have with the scores given by the Congressional Budget Office. But it really isn't their fault, since they must score legislation based on the gimmicks written into the bills. Senator John Cornyn wants an honest cost estimate of the tax and spending bill now before the U.S. Senate. He argues the American people deserve more than smoke and mirror accounting from Washington, D.C. That is the request he made in a letter to the heads of the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation. Both agencies released scores for the bill that the House passed and sent to the Senate. Even using their accounting, you have a bill that spends $1.6 trillion while only raising $1.3 trillion in taxes. One organization not required to accept these budget gimmicks estimate the bill could require $4.6 trillion in spending. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget set the figure at $4.9 trillion. Why the difference between the CBO estimates and the others? Well, the bill sets arbitrary sunsets and expirations to make the legislation look less expensive, but have no bearing on reality. Once these child allowances and tax credits are given, it is unlikely any would ever be revoked. Former President Ronald Reagan observed, "The closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program." If this inaccurate cost estimate isn't bad enough, you still have members of the Biden administration arguing that spending trillions of dollars on new government programs won't cost anything. Talk about an economic statement completely divorced from reality. Here's hoping that someone in one of these agencies is finally willing to get the score right. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio today, as we're talking about kind of a filmmaking journey, and along the way, if some of you that have been involved in film or interested in that, I'd love to get your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Going to not only talk about The Man from Nowhere, which is what we featured right now, but we want to talk about some of these others like Run the Race, Blue Miracle, White Hope Grows, Priceless, and some of the others. But let's go up to KJNP. They're in Alaska. And Eric, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, hi, Kerby. Good to talk to you again. I've talked to you a few times in the past, and I have some, this is a very timely topic because I just started or restarted production of a movie here, all based with the local Fairbanks talent, and it's called Steel Stonehenge. It's a science fiction movie based on creation science, and we talk a lot about particle physics and some of the questions people have raised about scientific research in general. So it's a fun movie, offbeat and quirky, and I think it's something that's been needed for a long time.
Well, very good. Chris, I was just thinking that sometimes these themes, and there's a good one, particle physics, that's going to be a tough sell, are difficult to kind of put your head around. And so, again, one of the creative aspects of film is to take some things which are sort of abstract or maybe remote and make them personal and visceral. And that's really what you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, even when you write your kind of first screenplay, they always tell you, like, write what you know.
Yes.
And so it always ends up being, like, your most personal piece. And it's, if it's your first one, it's usually not very good, but that's, but getting through it is that trial by fire, right? You make sure, I think it's probably true to say 99.9% of the people that start a screenplay don't finish it.
That's another point.
Yeah, and I think it is a trial by fire. That first one, I always tell young writers, you don't think that you're going to sell this one or this one's going to blow in the doors. This one is literally the one to get you through the whole process for the first time.
Right.
After that, it'll become exponentially easier with each script you start writing. But if you never finish that first one, you'll never get to the second one or the third one or the fourth one. So I think that cuts short the journey for most writers right there, is if they don't finish it. So I always just say, hey, man, you got to get in there, you got to finish it. But typically it is a very personal, overwritten piece. But that makes sense, right? Because like you said, you do write what you know. But I think ultimately, what we all want to do is take characters and stories and like you said, if they're obtuse or even abstract in ways, to find ways to make each part of it relatable to the audience, and the best stories have different pieces that relate to different members of the audience, but at the end, they're all connected and they're all interested and want to go on the journey with the main character, with the protagonist, right?
And what's so interesting about this, and I don't even claim to be a screenwriter, I am a writer. First of all, I say to people, well, I want to be a good writer. I say, well, write every day, because part of that is the case. Now, Dallas Jenkins has been with us before. Of course, he's done The Chosen. He tends to try to write every night. I always write in the daytime. I don't know how these people write at 11 o'clock at night to 1 in the morning. But okay, whatever works for you. But write every day, because you said the first screenplay that you come out is going to be a disaster. But then you begin to think about, okay, did that make sense? Did that character interact with that other character? How do I move the story forward without having voiceover narration and those kinds of really important things? And that's why people go to film school. You can probably learn some of it on your own, but you're going to have to be paying attention to all of that. And I've even read manuscripts where a character shows up in the second act, if you will, or the second chapter, and then you don't even hear about it again until the 7th chapter, and you go like, what happened there? I mean, so there's just all sorts of things, whether you're a writer for a fiction or whether you're a screenwriter, that you have to pay attention to, don't you?
Yeah, and I think most people know the beginning and the end of their movie. That's the thing, right? Everyone's got the beginning and the end, and it's that second act that you're speaking of where it gets hard. It's how do you connect it? How do you keep the action going? How do you keep the pacing going? And I think that's what kind of separates professional writers from people that are, figuring it out or just doing it on a hobby and stuff, is I think that is really that's the key right there, is everyone's got the beginning and the end. How do you make the middle work?
I've talked to some people that over the years have been writers and producers, and they say one thing I found is that when you start a project, you have this sort of obligatory scene that you're just sure has to be in the final product. And usually by the time you're done, it's the one that gets jettisoned. So the one that brought you to the project sometimes is the one you end up throwing out.
That's funny. And there's always that one, too, where it's like everyone is telling you as you're giving them, even in the movie, like, after you've shot the movie, there's like, and you're screening it for friends and people, and there's that one scene that you were so sure concretely had to be in there. And everyone's like, dude, it's not working. It's not working. You're like, yes, it is. Yeah. And then finally, at the very end, right before you have to turn it in, you go, it didn't work. I got to get rid of it. But you held on to it the entire time. Same thing with the script. Yeah, you'll have these certain scenes, or a lot of times people will also, as it's very personal, they'll be like, I'll read it and I'll read a scene and I'll be like, yeah, this isn't working. They're like, but it was so funny when it happened to me. And I'm like, oh. Again, it was a personal experience, and it probably was really funny when you were there and it happened, but like the way it plays out in our movie
doesn't work.
Yeah, it's not. It's just not working. So keep that as a memory.
And another thing that you're having to deal with is when some people say faith-based film, Christian film, they go, oh boy, one-dimensional characters, predictable plots, obligatory scenes, and things like that. And there's a real place for you to mix it up, isn't there?
Yeah, and and I think we are, as an audience, as a faith-based audience, we're probably guilty of. I think it was Andy Mineo. I heard he said something where it was like, as a Christian audience, we'll forgive the arts if they agree with the message.
Yeah.
And I think we're definitely guilty of that in a lot of the faith films, and that's okay, because there's different lanes, and there's faith films that are made for the church. There's faith films that are made for the broader audience, and so they have different goals, and so it makes total sense that there's guys that I love that are making movies that are like cheerleading for the church and get the church excited, and that we need that. But there's also where the territory I like to be in is kind of more of a Christian lens or Christian worldview inside of hopefully a more secular film. And that's, you start getting a territory that's a little tougher, where you walk the line and it's like you live in no man's land, and it's too faithy for the secular crowd and not faithy enough for the faith crowd, and then you're like, ugh.
I can understand that. And, of course, Christian artists have had the same thing if they want to do crossover. But let's take a good example. Blue Miracle, Dennis Quaid. Everybody knows Dennis Quaid. That one did extremely well on Netflix, did it not?
Yeah, I mean, Blue Miracle was amazing. We were number 2 on the platform in the world for like 3 weeks.
Yes.
And same thing, that's a great story, true story, but where there was enough faith in it that it's, that it satisfied that craving. It was family friendly, but yet it was broad enough, much like a Blind Side or something, like it was broad enough to still appeal to a larger crowd. So there's a Christian worldview inside of a more secular film. And that model worked very well. I mean, who knows? I mean, 100 million people have seen it on Netflix probably. I mean, it's crazy.
And again, let's, if we can, mention a couple others, but we're coming to a break, so we may get to those after the break. But we will talk about Priceless and Where Hope Grows, and the issue of Down syndrome, Asperger's. You take on some really tough issues. And to me, that's something else that we need in the Christian world. If anything, we can't expect the world to sometimes have Christian compassion towards individuals that are dealing with some kind of physical, mental issue. But we certainly should hope that some Christian film producers are going to address those issues, and that seems to be what you've been doing.
Yeah, no, my passion is definitely special needs community, and it was kind of art imitating life because I really had no reference point before Where Hope Grows, before I wrote that script, and then going through that process, getting to meet and fall in love with the main actor, David DeSanctis, who, again, super close with, we still text every day. And that really altered my life, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm in special needs ministries and on boards of organizations, and I'm always looking for opportunities to find films where I can plug in individuals with special needs, and I'm cheering on anybody else that's doing that. So, but it all came back to literally writing the script, Where Hope Grows, and trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, I will take some more phone calls if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. In here, primarily talking about the latest one, The Man from Nowhere. And again, if you just happen to join us, an individual best-selling author pens a particular part that he is using to try to reach out to his son, and as a result, I think you're going to really enjoy that. We talk about prodigal father, so there's a very good example of that. And if you'd like to join us, we're going to talk a little bit more about this whole filmmaking journey, because we haven't talked about some of these other films that you've been involved with. And again, if you would like to join us, we'll take your phone calls. Also, we'll get a little bit of an update on some of your upcoming projects. I know you got some other things to talk about as well. And for those of you that watch Hallmark, my wife does every night, Danica McKellar was one of the people that you work with. You might remember her as Winnie, or else as the heroine right now in Hallmark. That's somebody else where you have used that individual as an actress. And so let's take a break. And when we come back, don't forget we have a lot of other articles that we've posted on the website today, including my Viewpoints commentary and our Take Action item. We give those to you as well. And if you appreciate this conversation we're having right now, you might click on that button, which gives you a chance to support this ministry. It's coming to year end. We certainly need your financial support. If you can help us out and enjoy these kinds of conversations, click on the button that says donate and help us out. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Or sit back. But most importantly, I encourage you to go to our website right now and find The Man from Nowhere. Of course, you could type those words in. I think it would take you there as well. I would encourage you to watch the trailer. And we have in studio with us today Chris Dowling. And Chris, I thought for just a minute I might ask a personal question. Here we're talking about a father. You know, I'm a father and now even a grandfather because because I'm the old guy around the table here, but you think about that from a father's perspective. Another action item out of this film is to take seriously the time that you have with your kids. You're never going to get that time back again. Also, I don't want people to think that once I've blown it, there's never a chance for redemption, because this is also sort of a redemption story. But I'm sure it probably affected you, thinking about kids and raising kids and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a 13 and 11-year-old daughter, and I mean, I'm constantly blown away. If I blink, how much older and bigger, and they change. But I mean, I think it's interesting for me with girls. I think it's so key to have a father that is very much telling them they're beautiful, showing them love, making them feel comfortable and safe, because, someday I'm going to hand them over to another man, and, I want them to be their own person and be confident. And I think that I'm sure that applies for sons too. I don't have a son, but I can only imagine if you don't feel protected and loved by, valued. I think value is the key, right? Mm-hmm. By your father. I think that, it's obviously detrimental. I mean, that is something that, although you can't get it back, you can make it work.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't
said.
go back and totally fix the damage that's been done as a child, because that damage is always going to be there. But you can realize your mistake. And that's part of the pride too, right? Like, you'd have to come off your high horse and realize you made a big mistake with your children, and it would be time to go back and fix that mistake. So as right now, I mean, again, I've got little girls becoming teenagers, which is crazy time.
Yes, for sure. But for your wife, especially.
Yeah, no doubt.
Between the wife and the mother and the daughters, sometimes it can get almost thermonuclear. So you have to pay attention to that too.
And there's a lot of estrogen at our house for sure. But they're all great, and again, I just think this really also, like any of these stories, just make me look back and say, I don't want to be the 60, 70-year-old guy that is making this phone call.
That's right. And again, if I can put on the kind of the mantle for just a minute as the family policy kind of person, you recognize that for a young boy to really understand what it means to be a man, they need men in their lives. And if there is an absent father, then maybe there's some others that come along with them. But for the girls, they really understand how they are to be perceived in the world by how their father perceives them. And again, we've seen the tremendous value of fathers in both roles of son and daughter, and we certainly want to encourage those of you that have that opportunity to encourage you to do more of that. And so we've talked about A Man from Nowhere, and if you would like to know a little bit more, it's on our website. But just before we took a break, we talked about where hope grows, and what a great opportunity for our listeners out there that have been willing to address this issue in their own households, because I am well aware, my wife and I walk twice a day. She walks me twice a day, just like a dog. So we walk out of the neighborhood, and we have gotten to know a lot of children that various people in our neighborhood have physical or mental issues, and you have a real heart for and have really done some great films on some of those very difficult topics, haven't you?
Yeah, again, Where Hope Grows, Hollywood Reporter said it was the first English-speaking film that starred an individual with Down syndrome. And it was really cool because it's funny how it all worked out, because really my idea on the story was I wanted to write a movie about an individual as an adult who has it all but doesn't have faith, and then he gets introduced to just the simplest form of faith, which would be childlike faith, as an adult.
Yes.
And I was like, well, who could be the harbinger of this childlike faith? And I was like, oh, somebody with Down syndrome. That makes sense, even though I didn't have any real experience with Down syndrome. And then once we started, wrote it, and we just got some money behind it, and we knew we were going to make the movie, and we were going to cast it. And it was interesting because you have a lot of people that tell you, you can't hire, you won't be able to cast an individual with Down syndrome to play this part. Like, maybe you should change it and maybe do a different, special need group that isn't as physical, so you could tell. And we said, no, we're gonna do it. We're gonna find somebody, and we're gonna just, come heck or high water, we're gonna make it happen. And sure enough, we found this individual, and I mean, David DeSanctis. And he had never acted before.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, it is something, because to be an actor in your first film, your first lead role, just as a typical person, we would say, like, that that's so hard and stressful and crazy. And for David to have that, and then also, to have the Down syndrome element, that like it just blew me away. But then again, I constantly found myself putting David in a box because I would say, oh, well, he won't be able to do this. And then he would do it. And I would go, why? And I kept going, why do I keep doubting you, man? Like, and
that's so good.
But it's so true. Like all of these expectations and limitations that he had were just things that I had put upon him. You know what I mean? And so, and again, to this day, I mean, we're still great friends, and his family comes and stays at our house and visits, and I'm always looking for opportunities to find more work for him and other individuals with special needs. I've got a great producing partner, Milan Chakraborty, that did this movie with me, and I know he's always looking for that. And so, like, in right now in entertainment, there's a big cry for what people would say is marginalized or underrepresented, people. And honestly, it's interesting because the special needs community is, in a lot of ways, the most underrepresented group out there in entertainment. And so, anything I can do to be even a small part that changes that is, that's key. I mean, that would be my goal almost above anything else.
When you think about it on the mental issue with the idea of autism spectrum and Asperger's and things like that, you have some actors, The Good Doctor, for example, playing a role where he's not. Of course, you have Matthew in The Chosen playing a role like that, but it would be worthwhile to even see if that would be the case. So just some really incredible opportunities. And again, I think as a Christian, you're thinking about those individuals and thinking about how do I represent them in a way that honors the Lord, because we recognize that though they may not have all of our gifts, they have other gifts, and ultimately they're valued by the Lord.
Oh, I think that's it, right? Like, I mean, when we're commanded to, look after the least of these, I mean, how could that not be more in our face? And then I go to churches, and I don't think it's never a malicious thing, but like I go to a lot of churches speaking or even visiting or doing whatever, and I'll ask to see the special needs, ministry of the room. And a lot of times it's just the land of broken toys. You know what I mean? You go there and it's like all the leftover toys from the other room, and it's just, they're just in there and they're all just sitting in there. And it's like, man, like there's got to be a better way to do this as a church and as believers.
So good. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Craig Johnson at Lakewood has a thing called Champions Club, and they're doing that. And it's so impressive. And I mean, it is a conscious effort to make sure that, special needs ministries have the resources to make it special for these kids, to make it as good as, the quote unquote typical kids that are, down the street down the hall, their thing looks like Disneyland. It's all built out in these crazy new churches, right? Like there's slides and fake trees and all that great stuff. And then over there, it's just like, hey, here's a room. Like, it's not right. And again, I understand it because it's difficult for us to even, it's a whole topic we would, hours to talk about, even like, God and special needs and the value of human life and what they teach us. And now talking to literally thousands of individuals with special needs, families, all that stuff. I can tell you that I never had one person say, hey man, like they weren't still a blessing in my life, or they weren't a blessing. You know what I mean? Like I feel like
just the opposite.
Yeah. I feel like these people, everyone thinks it's going to be, and that was a big part, honestly, of Where Hope Grows. Some of the amazing things that we saw was like, the abortion rate for individuals that get diagnosed and with with Down syndrome, it was something crazy, like a 90 to 95% abortion rate. And we had individuals message us on our Facebook page to tell us that they literally saw that movie and that changed their idea of what it would mean to have an individual with Down syndrome as a child. Mm-hmm. And so
good for you.
So it's such a cool thing to be able to. And that's what we want, right? Hopefully affect culture, but like that affects humans' lives. Like there are human beings, and not just my movie, but other movies. There's human beings that wouldn't be on this earth if, their mom hadn't seen, Where Hope Grows or other movies, that do that. But and to me, that's the magic of it. Like, how could there be more of an impact than that?
And again, just a great ministry that you've had there. Since you're talking about that, how about when we come back from the break, we'll talk about Tim Tebow, because Run the Race, of course, he has done so much to emphasize special needs. Of course, our own church has always had these various celebrations, and as a deacon, sometimes I've had a chance to interact with each one of those as well. But we need to take a break. We'll talk about Run the Race, Tim Tebow, and I got to mention King and Country, don't I? Just at least that one, priceless. So we'll get into those, and hope you're enjoying this. But again, don't forget the major focus we have today on The Man from Nowhere. We have information about that on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We are just privileged to have in studio with us today Chris Dowling. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we have information about him. We have information about the movie The Man from Nowhere. And for those of you that would really like to have something that reaffirms your faith, and it's, of course, a reminder of how important it is to be a good parent and really to redeem the time, but also a story of redemption, I think you will really enjoy the film. We've been talking about a couple of different films here in the moment, and of course we talked about Where Hope Grows, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Tim Tebow, who we always have appreciated. Run the Race, which really did extremely well just from a financial point of view, didn't it?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, you know, we it was one of those movies that didn't have a giant budget, but yet we still were able to push it out there and make a really decent box office with it. It was a Lionsgate roadside attraction film, and you know, Tim was. It was the first, and I think probably only movie that Tim's executive produced. And so he got to speak into it. And then his brother Robbie was, who's become a very close friend, was, you know, on set with us every day as an executive producer. And it was cool. We had like kind of Team Tebow there working with us. And it was a lot of football in the movie. And it really was cool. It really appealed to like, especially a younger audience. That was kind of our goal for like, teens and, you know, younger individuals and stuff. Like that was, it's because it's focused on a high school, you know, it's got a very Friday Night Lights. And I think even some of the reviews said that, like with a faith kind of spin on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you got to love an individual that could have just said, look, I'm going to focus on football and then later on baseball. But in the midst of this had just a real heart for the things we were just talking about a minute ago. Those individuals that sometimes get left behind, even in church ministry. And if nothing else, Chris, I'm hoping that our conversation today might encourage some of the pastors listening to this, maybe deacons and elders, saying, we don't really have a special needs outreach. And if you even advertise that you have it, you better build another wing to your church, because there are people with those needs, and to know that a church is willing to meet those needs, there are going to be a lot of people running to that door.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I would send anybody that has questions about that to go look at that Champions Club with Lakewood. I mean, they do it right, but and that's something that they replicated other churches and organizations and orphanages and stuff. But I think part of that too is like if you just offered that as a reprieve for those families, because it's such hard work for the parents.
It is.
And so even if they just said, hey, if you come to church, we'll be watching your kids for an hour and a half. You may have people that would have never walked into a church that would go just to get that break, and it's a blessing to them. Even if they decide whatever, they walk away from church and they go, "Hey, you know what? Like, it wasn't for me," or whatever the case may be. You were still able to bless them for an hour and a half every week, because they need that, and they needed that rest, and that was a service thing you can do. So you had the chance to get people into a church that might not go into a church by having a special needs community, a special needs ministry, and advertising and putting it out there. That's the other thing. Like, how cool if you're a church that has that, to go out into the community and say, we have this for you. Come here, gather here. But I think again, it can be very scary for sure. But there's a lot of things about faith that are scary. So
yeah, consider doing that. Let's talk about Priceless for just a minute. Then I want to talk about your future projects. But Priceless for King and Country, that was kind of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah. Again, working with topics that are not necessarily easy, and the boys, the Smallbone brothers, had a idea for this, a story that deals with sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And anytime you're going to write something like that, I mean, man, it was some dark weeks of like reading, some accounts.
Yeah,
and
I can't even imagine
watching,
that.
Watching documentaries and stuff. And but it was super eye opening. But it was really nice to work with those guys. And their brother Ben Smallbone, he directed it, and he did a fantastic job. And Joel plays the lead and does his American accent, and it's great, and I'm proud of it.
And it was Inspiration Film of the Year. It was nominated, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think the Dove, for the Dove Awards. Yeah, absolutely.
And so again, just incredible things that are certainly on your list of accomplishments. But just since we only have a few minutes left, give us a feel for what's coming up next.
Yeah, the thing I'm most excited about is. We shot in Nashville. It's actually Ashland City, so it's just north of Nashville.
Okay.
But we shot a karaoke film comedy starring Shonda Pierce, and it is it is.
I've been hearing about that.
Okay, it's hilarious and it's so much fun, and we had such a blast with it. She is a hoot. She is a hoot. She is so great, and she can sing. And we actually, we spent the money to go get like Huey Lewis songs and Freebird and Built This City by Starship, and we have this Katrina and the Waves, Walking on Sunshine, and the cool thing is it's a broader family comedy. So it's something that you could totally watch, and there's Christian undertones in it. I mean, she's obviously Christian. She sings in her church choir. But I definitely would call it a family movie. It's definitely not faith-based, but it's one of those movies that like you would go see it and then you'd be super hype that there was that much. You could read that much faith into it, but it was more of a broader film.
Yes.
So that's the one. It was supposed to come out in theaters last year with COVID and all. That's kind of obviously shelved and messed things up. We're still trying to figure out exactly what our distribution plan is with that one.
Yeah, I think I heard about that, and I was wondering what happened to it. So there you go.
Yeah, so there's that one, and then also a Little Jimmy Dickens biopic. If you're familiar with Little Jimmy Dickens. So Little Jimmy Dickens is the longest tenured act at the Grand Ole Opry.
Oh, okay.
And actually, if you go to the Grand Ole Opry now, if you go to the Ryman Auditorium and you walk, there's like these bronze statues going up the side. It's probably, I don't know, maybe it's like Minnie Pearl and Waylon Jennings or something. But then you get to the front, and right in front of the box office there's one little 4'10" statue, and that's Little Jimmy Dickens. And it's really cool. It's the love story between him and his his wife, now widow, but at 1968 to 1971, country music, Nashville, Grand Ole Opry, a lot of, those characters come in. And so I'm really excited about that one, which we should shoot next year. And then there's a football movie based on a New York Times article about it's a high school championship game in 1972 in Monroe, Louisiana. And it's really interesting. It was actually before they had playoffs. Before they had overtime in like the playoffs and in regular season. And so it was the first time in the history of high school sports where a game ended in a playoff game. It was a semifinal game. And then all the tiebreakers were even across the board for both the teams. And so the whistle blew and they literally just looked around and put their hands up and said, they hadn't ever, for some reason, they hadn't ever planned on what to do, like a contingency plan if that happens. And so they decided to replay the game 2 days later. So they play this championship game.
I've never heard of
2
that.
days later, and then 3 days later, they have to play the state. Whoever wins plays the state championship game. And it all takes place, obviously, in December, but it's like monsoon weather. Like the games are like 0-0, 0-6, 9-0. And these guys, this isn't, this is back in the day, not when like these nice little fields that are drained real nicely. Dude, they're in slop. I've seen pictures like, it's like almost ankle, you can't see their ankles. Like they're in mud and uniforms are completely brown. So, that's a fun one that we also, same thing, should go into production this year.
Yeah. So again, just some great opportunities. Didn't know about that. Matter of fact, we're going to be in Nashville in February because that's where the National Religious Broadcasters Convention is, and we'll be celebrating 50 years of Point of View. Marlon Maddox started in 1972. So if you do the math, that's 50 years. And so
let me be the first, or maybe not the first, to say congratulations.
Yes. And more importantly, I'm going to take some time to go see some of these things in Nashville that you've told me about that I didn't know about. So that is certainly the case. Chris, it's been great to have you in studio. I know you're a busy guy, so giving us an hour means a lot, and thank you for all the films you've done and for the films that are coming out. But one last time, if you have not taken the time to go to our website, The Man from Nowhere, click on his picture. We have a trailer which we encourage you to watch and to pass on to others, and I hope you'll take the time to get all the information that you need right there on Point of View. And thank you for being in studio with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kerby. Appreciate you.
I want to say thank you, first of all, to Andrew as our engineer, making sure all of this sounds good to you, as well as our producer, Steve. We have a busy week, and each day we're going to be covering a lot of very important issues, so we hope that we will see you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective.